Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TechShift F9 podcast, a podcast dedicated to reinventing your career in the age of technology. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have Hesham Bakr on the show. I've known Hesham for over 30 years, and he's a dear friend and a wonderful human being. Today on the show, I'll be speaking with him about his professional life, experiences, and insights. Hesham is Senior Vice President and Head of HR at Eyemart Express and has a long career in senior HR positions at companies such as Yum Brands, Walt Disney, CB Richard Ellis, and more. Hi, Hesham. Welcome to TechShift F9. It's fabulous having you on the show.
Oh, it's nice. Thank you for inviting me over.
Sure. So, Hesham, your career is an amazing testament to talent, resilience, and flexibility that you have. You worked at some major corporations in your distinguished HR career, and yet to find the time to realize your high school dream, or at least one of the dreams that you had back then, which is launch your own coffee store and chain. But before we get there, let's cast our minds back to when you were a fresh college graduate, immigrated a few years prior to the US, and look at the world of possibilities ahead of you. What made you choose to go into human resources?
Well, I really didn't choose to go into human resources, and I still don't think I'm in human resources. I don't quite like to kind of pigeonhole myself into a specific function or career. I actually started out as an operator. So I obviously went to business school, and when I graduated, I started out with the Walt Disney Company. And at Walt Disney, I was really by and large, a jack of all trades. Walt Disney loves breadth of experience versus depth of experience. That's really valued there. So I did all sorts of jobs in food operations, in multi-unit leadership. I even had a short stint with ESPN, which is owned by the Walt Disney Company, and so on. And one thing led to the other, where my business experience or my business education and operations experience kind of led itself into what was a short-term assignment with the HR team at Disney, turned into a completely different direction for my career. So I believe it was supposed to be a 90-day short-term assignment, and then I had a full-time offer after that to stay with the team. It was a very specific project, very analytical, that kind of combined some ops, some business acumen. It was really a little bit of a hybrid role. And to be honest, all my HR roles from that point for the last 25 years now have been hybrid roles. I've never been kind of your traditional HR person. I've been kind of mostly the analytical guy or the critical thinker within the HR department.
And let's dig deeper into that. This is very interesting to me.
Sure.
And do you think that the fact that you haven't been in traditional HR, pigeonhole, typical job, was
Mm-hmm.
something that, I mean, initially you said sort of happened a little bit by accident, but it sort of continued through your career. How did you seek those kind of opportunities? And what made you realize that the companies you were going for would give you those opportunities rather than, again, put you into a very specific and limited role?
Yeah, well, I was blessed earlier in my career working for companies that were a mutual fund in themselves, like the Walt Disney Company. For example, they had everything from entertainment to food operations to movie like cinema and television and so on. So you had an amazing opportunity to try out different industries while staying with your own company, and not only industries but functions as well. And Disney, as I mentioned earlier, valued cross-functional experience quite a bit, and so that was a golden ticket for success at Disney, is for you to try out as many opportunities as you possibly can, and they actually promoted that quite a bit. Um, so that was part of the opportunities were coming to me in part because I was in the right place at the right time and the right companies. But further along, you need to kind of develop that as a skill and a strength in you to kind of continuously seek opportunities and continuously think about what's next. It's you and I have known each other for many, many, many years now, and you know that I've never been the kind of person that would sit back and want to feel comfortable. The moment I feel comfortable is the moment I think I'm being too complacent. So I'm constantly looking at, or it's ingrained in me to constantly rethink and think again about where I am right now, where I'm heading. And that in itself, that mindset, and coupled with being in the right place with the right company and in the right situation, you tend to see opportunities. And when you see one, there is always a risk associated with it, right? I mean, it's always opportunities always present themselves into different ways, but the bottom line is that it usually stretches you outside your comfort zone, and you need to be ready to take that step. And sometimes you need to jump head first, when that opportunity comes knocking on the door.
Totally. And a lot of companies do a really good job with their PR, sending out a
Mhm.
message that they're a great place to work in. It's fantastic
Mhm.
environment, lots of opportunities. But you've actually been able to demystify a little bit of that and actually find opportunities that were truly what you were looking for. And in terms of the depth of the role,
Yeah.
the opportunities to travel. Um, what were some of your tricks, or I wouldn't say tricks, what were some of the ways that you adopted to do your due diligence about these companies in an effective way?
Well, the first step of doing your due diligence is to really understand who you are and what you're looking for, and what is the brand that you're trying to develop for yourself. Not knowing that, I mean, you're almost a product, right? I mean, as a professional, you're a product, and you want to place yourself in a position to be successful. And not all companies are created equal, and some companies value certain things more than others. So it really, to answer your question, it started by knowing exactly who I am, and what I added, or what I can add to a company, and where I can fit in. After my first couple of opportunities where they were all mega, corporations and so on, I started going a little smaller. And the smaller you go, like mid-sized to smaller companies, the more they want you to be a little bit more cross-functional, the more they value breadth of experience as well as depth of your experience as well, but by and large your depth, because the smaller it is, the more they rely heavily on you being able to be more of a problem solver, and cover more areas, because they don't have the luxury of building major functions and departments, and hire the top grads from every school and so on. And that's really where I mean, if you were to define me as a professional and what is my brand as a professional, it's my ability to work cross functionally. I leverage quite a bit my early operations experience, my business education, both undergrad and grad. The industries that I worked in, whether financial services or entertainment or food operations and so on, I lean very heavily on those experiences to function on a day-to-day basis. And it kind of sets me apart a little bit, in the sense that there are, most people kind of choose a specific linear trajectory to their career. And so they become really good at one or two or three things. In my case, I may not be the best person at everything I do, but I can do a whole lot more than what the traditional person can do.
You and I both have changed quite a few companies. We've gone through that process a few
Yeah.
times. And as you mentioned, you worked at some major corporations, some mid-sized ones, some smaller ones. Can you walk me through your various careers changes from the perspective of how you dealt with both the new professional technical challenges of the jobs, but also the human aspect of working with new people, perhaps new locations, new ways of doing stuff?
Yeah, I mean, and I did. I mean, I moved. You and I have moved quite a bit in our lives. I mean, I think I had a stretch in my career where I moved 13 times in 8 years. My wife and I literally stopped unpacking. We just kept the boxes in the attic, because we knew in about 6 to 8 months we're probably going to put it on a truck again and go somewhere else. But back to your question, I mean, all companies there are industries, there are traits that are inherent in every industry, and there are, the way the companies are set up.
Right.
And over time, you will notice that I gravitated towards the service industry. That's where I found a home, and that's where I found myself feeling most comfortable. But the journey that I took to realize that this is where I feel like it's my second nature. More specifically, when I say service, I mean retail and or food operations. I just love multi-unit management, or companies with multiple units in multiple states or countries. That complexity, that kind of scale is what really gets me excited. And the complexity of having labor in different jurisdictions with different um, challenges here and there. That's for some reason that's what gets me excited every morning, and I just kind of can't wait to kind of start working on those challenges. But I've had experience with financial services, for example, where it's one thing to be successful, but it's another thing to enjoy that success. And I really never enjoyed being successful in financial services. It did not get me excited, like I kind of mentioned to you earlier. But irrespective of where you are, you still need to be successful. Just saying that you don't like an industry does not necessarily mean that you're going to give up and just move on. So one of the things I tried to do when I moved into a new industry or a new function is, first of all, try to speak the language of the business. And initially you kind of fake it until you make it, but it's necessary for you to talk like you are an expert in that industry. So when I was in financial services, one of the companies I worked for was an international insurance underwriter. And I had to really understand the lingo of the insurance industry and to understand the jobs and what each person does and why is this better than that. Even though it was completely unnecessary for my job, it was, I believe it's part of your success is to be completely ingrained in the industry that you're in. If you're really going to be a strategic partner with other functions, you have to speak their language and you have to understand what their challenges are, and you have to think the way they think. And only then will you be able to actually pull a chair at the table, and you will gain that credibility where you can really add value. So whenever I made a shift or a change or what have you, that's really where I focused the first, let's say, 6 to 12, 14 months, is for me to completely listen and to emulate the behaviors and the thought process and the approach of others, and not worry too much about me kind of shining right from the get-go, because I will shine later. Let me shine based on credibility and based on rapport, versus shine and then be a fallen star, kind of a fallen shooting star later, where kind of it fizzles because you really didn't build that foundation. I don't know if I answered your question. It was a rambling answer.
You just made a great point, because I think a lot of people, when changing, particularly going into a new industry or a new company, there's a certain degree of anxiety having to prove yourself, right? Particularly as men, I think we feel like we have to, ring fence our territory, ensure that we're strong and what have you. But I love your approach, which is much more of a long-term approach of building your capabilities, educating yourself in the industry, technical terms, human terms, the way things are done at the company and so forth, to get yourself ready for battle. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Hesham, now let's talk about Duino Coffee.
Yeah.
The coffee shop and chain you launched just before COVID. Some timing, huh?
Yeah.
Can you walk us through your mental and practical approaches to finally pressing the button to start your coffee empire?
Yeah, so you started out by saying it was a dream of mine from really high school. If you remember, well, for the listener, you and I went to the same high school, and in Italy, and I had my very first sip of a true Italian espresso in downtown. Well, there is no downtown, but downtown Duino, like the hub of Duino. Let's call it that way. I think it was El Pescatore, Cafe El Pescatore, I
Yep.
believe,
Caffè al
is where
Pescatore,
we
that's
had
right.
it. And yeah, and I was just, it was love at first sight, literally. I had a kind of a coffee culture prior to that, coming from Egypt, and and having a family that really was very particular about their coffee beans and making their own Turkish coffee just right and so on. But coming to Italy and just experiencing that first espresso was really a transformative experience for myself, and that became kind of my passion from that point on. In fact, I don't know if you recall or not, but on the day before last, when we were saying goodbye to each other, I think we all made promises to each other, and I said something like, "Someday I'm going to start my own business and come back and hire you all," or something to that effect. Or so again, a history lesson here. The reason why I'm starting from that is that it was a really deeply ingrained passion of mine, and you really have, if you're going to take such a risk of following a dream, make sure that it is really a dream, not a daydream. Where it's something like you've imagined yourself, being a multi-billionaire and driving a Bentley, as this and that. That's not really a dream. This is an aspiration, which is great. You can aspire to be all of that. But if you're gonna jump ship and have a career shift, start something that you think you know enough about, but in reality you know nothing about, and take that level of risk, especially that late in my life, because I did it in my early 40s, mid 40s, where really I didn't have and I had 3 kids at the time, full family, lots of responsibilities and so on. The younger you take that risk, the more time you have to recover if or when you fail, because there will be failures. I mean, it should be actually expected and planned for. And the older you do it, and by no means is 40 something old, but you don't have as much time to recover if something really wrong happens. And in my case, something really wrong happened, which is COVID. It is literally the worst time in a generation and a half to start a business. 2018, 2019 proved to be absolutely the worst in any industry, to any idea. You didn't want to be starting at that point. And so it starts with having a belief in your idea, researching it extremely well. So in my case, I actually took a step back, and instead of jumping head first, I wanted to manage that risk by going back to school. So I went back to get my MBA to make sure that I was armed with all the knowledge that was required for me to take what was an idea into an actual strategy and an executable plan. And once I felt that I had the knowledge and the financial resources, I had, the idea for me to go for it, even though I did it in mid 2018, it really started around 2011 or 2012, where I literally started saving some money and putting it aside. And every time anyone would ask, "What are you going to do with this money?" I said, "Well, I'm going to start my own business." And I kept repeating that over and over again until in 2018, I said, "Okay, it's now or never. Let's go for it." And I literally just woke up one morning and I quit my career. I mean, it was almost as simple as that. Obviously, there were some external factors that was occurring where I wasn't really feeling excited about the work that I was doing. I felt that, I was losing that passion where I was waking up in the morning excited about going to work. And I said, well, there is absolutely no reason for someone not to be excited about waking up in the morning and going to work. And maybe that's my calling to start something new. And that's when I made that shift.
Hesham, what were the hardest things that you encountered in running Duino Coffee? And aside from COVID, from the practical implications of having your business that perhaps you didn't plan or didn't expect? And how did you learn how to handle them?
Yeah, so you start out with hypotheses. And I'm telling you right now, for all the listeners who have business ideas, all your hypotheses are going to be proven wrong, which is actually perfectly fine, because once you learn what's wrong, you're going to realize what's right. It's almost a journey that every business owner or someone who starts a business, well, it's a journey that you have to go through, and it's agony that you have to experience, because ultimately it's going to make you that more resilient and that much more knowledgeable about what is it that you need to do. So my business model was absolutely, I wouldn't say wrong, but it wasn't accurate enough. So my pro forma, you might as well just use it for wallpaper or something, because it was useless. All the assumptions that I had in there, whether it was the number of transactions per day or the average check, um, or even my pricing model, it was just flat out won't work. And it was based on an assumption of who my customers were, which didn't exist. I mean, it was as bad as that. And I think I did amazing research. I did research for 6 months, and I was still wrong. And so I had to pivot, and the pivoting occurred, I want to say, about 6 months before COVID. And I'm grateful of that, because I learned so much in that exercise of pivoting. So, for example, my check average was extremely low. In the coffee industry, you make money with volume, because you're selling, lattes as $5 a pop, but you're paying the same rent, they pay you the same utility, same everything as the steakhouse across the street, where they're selling you a steak for $30 or $40 per transaction. So, in order for me to make any profit, I need to be having lines out the door every breakfast and every lunch period. And that's the only way to actually even break even in some cases. And my hypotheses of how to achieve a line out the door was wrong, was not absolutely accurate. I needed to have more grab and go food. I needed to have more high value, high margin items. I needed to have a merchandising and retail strategy. This is really how the Starbuckses of the world can have locations that gross $2 million. It's with all the other additional stuff that they are buying. And I had to have continuously changing menus so people would come 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. Otherwise, you're competing with hundreds of other coffee shops out there. So I started that pivot roughly about 6 or 7 months after opening. And then COVID hits, where I just spent, I think at the time, I spent close to $25,000 on a complete rebrand of who we are. Even our logo changed, and I was planning a grand reopening to some extent. And it was really a transformation for the business. And then we closed down. So all that 25 plus in expense in spend just went poof. It was just gone. Not to mention no cash flow as well, because we didn't really close. We here in the U.S., especially in Texas, we had to partially close, where no one was allowed inside the building. We had to take all food and drinks out, and people needed to order remotely. I can go more into details, obviously, but the interest of time, we had to completely transform our business. I mean, we did not have an online ordering platform. We had to create one. We did not have a delivery mechanism. I had to create one. And all of that happened in less than a week, by the way. Literally sitting there at night, rolled up my sleeves and going back to, being multifunctional, kind of have experiences that apply to many things. I had to be an IT professional. I had to be a marketing professional. I had to be a plumber. I had to be whatever it took to keep the company going.
Well, that also, I mean, it's incredible, and thank you for sharing, Hesham. But it also shows me that you don't necessarily have to launch a company when you're 20 years old. In fact, the experiences that you had helped you be able to deal with a huge game-changing issue like COVID for a retail business. So, there's always timing that suits different people in different industries at different times. Last couple of questions, Hesham.
Sure.
Now that you have a full-time position in a senior leadership role, you've had to delegate some of the operational and day-to-day work of running the Duino Coffee business. Can you tell us about how you went about that, and in particular, your decision process and how to find the right person or people, and how to keep yourself involved, but without a huge time commitment?
Yeah. So, all along when I decided to make that shift, I felt a high degree of responsibility towards my family. And as with most companies or startups out there, you're not going to you shouldn't expect any income for the first 2 years, because even if you made any money, you need to reinvest it back into the business. In fact, 2 years is wishful thinking. It's probably closer to 3 or 3.5 years. So in order to mitigate that risk, I was doing a lot of consulting. which in and itself was a huge startup for myself because I chose to be an independent consultant, really just leveraging my network and the people I've known throughout the years to find jobs. And I was working whenever I had time to work. And I realized that I was actually consulting was awesome, and it would have been even a different direction that I would have taken. So with that background is I wanted to explain that even when I decided to quit my career, I did some consulting to ensure that there was a steady stream of income, as well as money that I can actually invest back into Duino. Because I did not want to build my company with loans, and I did not want to take partners. I still don't, by the way. So it's very important for me to kind of keep control of the company, and so that I just wanted to reach a certain milestone before I can open up other options. That journey actually is what led me to where I am right now. The journey of having consulting on the side and focusing on opening Duino. And it was a very difficult journey because I was putting in at least 12 to 14-hour days into Duino, and then 5 or 6 hours additional into consulting. It was not easy. It was absolute, it was slow suicide in many respects physically. But luckily, my wife fell in love with Duino. It's obviously a family affair. Even my daughters and Zane, as 11 years old, actually works at Duino occasionally, and so on.
Fantastic.
Real work, not parents just putting him into pedestal kind of jobs to do. And Asil, my wife, actually quit her career and decided to be dedicated to Duino and manage the day to day. And she became so good at it where I actually felt that when I was presented with an opportunity to be a senior leader with a private equity owned company, that I can probably let go and let her run with it. And I can be the vision for the company, continue to be the vision. I can do marketing. I can do kind of the back office payroll and all that kind of stuff on weekends and in evenings. And I can be 100% dedicated to that career, which was yet again a new opportunity knocking on the door for me. Another very hybrid job, even though my title is head of HR, but it's really a very hybrid role of ops and a little bit of HR sprinkled into it, and to help a private equity company, hopefully, either be sold or go public, either or. I hope I answered that question.
You always do. It's
Okay.
amazing uh, being able to share practical experiences. I think
Yeah.
absolutely paramount to putting something out there concrete for people to hang
Yeah.
on to. So lastly, Hisham, I know it's a very open-ended question, maybe a little bit unfair, but if you were starting again today, right after
Mhm.
college, not a few years ago when we graduated, how would you approach your career if at all differently?
Wow, that's a very difficult question to answer because I don't have any regrets, but obviously I have scars, which I would rather not have. But in many ways, those scars is who I am now, right? In
Of
part,
course.
it's what defines me as a person and what I seek out and so on. If I were to go back, I didn't realize the impact that I can have on a company until in many respects. So let me start this in a different way. Say this in a different way. In many respects, professionally, I was a little bit of a late bloomer. So I started out kind of accepting the roles that are being presented to me versus really controlling and directing my career. And I probably would approach the first 10 years of my career a little differently because I was a little bit of a passive person, career wise, where I chose the right companies, I chose the right jobs, but that was about it. And I just sit back, relax, and let them promote me and let them move me into a different role and let them kind of do that to me, as opposed to be more in control of my career and more I want this versus that. I want this promotion versus that promotion. I want this company versus that company. And it's easier for me to say it now because I have that experience, right? But
Right.
when you're starting out, if I had to answer your question, that's what I would do differently. Is I would be more assertive and more controlling of my career. Now, one can argue that back then, when you were a lot younger, that would be perceived as arrogant or entitled or so on. So you never know, but how I would have approached it, But that's one thing that I would do differently. The other thing is to never ever accept a situation that you don't feel comfortable in. So, as I mentioned to you, there were some companies I worked for where the culture was just not a good fit. It was clear that it was not a good fit. And I, being the pleaser that I am, I opted to adjust who I was and how I acted and how I approached things to match that culture and to fit in. If I were to go back in time, I would not spend a whole lot of time trying to fit in. If I felt like it was not the right situation, let me move on. I mean, it's okay not to fit in, and trying to fit in is such a burden on oneself that I would
Yes.
never put myself through ever again. Whether it's a manager that you don't like working with or a company that just does things, not particularly the right way, or a culture that is just not positive enough, or whatever the reason might be, it is okay not to accept it. Just because there are thousands of others who love it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to love it too. And those are the two things that I would probably do differently if I were to go back in time. But easier said than done, obviously, Mauri, that now that we're here.
Indeed, indeed. Hesham, thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing your experience and insights. Much, much appreciated.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Well, folks, this is the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed the talk with Hesham as much as I did. Till next time, stay cool, stay positive,